of time and space. Everywhere and anywhere, every star that ever was. Where do you want to start?
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of All of Time and Space. I'm your host, Iain Martin, and joining me, my co-host...
Here's Mark. Hello.
Hello, Mark. So it's episode 4. We've been cooped up in the TARDIS for a couple of interminable episodes. Now it's time, I think, for a bit of fresh air, a bit of a change of pace, stretch our legs. Do you fancy a journey to Cathay?
Well, why not? Let's do that.
Fantastic. Do we have a lovely guest helping us?
We do. We have the lovely David Kitchen from the Doctor Who show, who is a massive First Doctor fan, so I think he will be all over this.
Fantastic. Right, on the other side of this, we'll be joining David Kitchen to talk about Marco Polo.
I find your caravan most unusual, Doctor.
Yes, Mr. Marco, it is different.
And in need of repair.
That is true.
Master Marco has ordered a sledge to be made. He's going to bring the TARDIS down here.
Oh, indeed. That's charming of you. Very charming, fellow. It won't take me very long to repair, a day or so, but I assure you that I shall not hold up your journey any longer than is necessary.
I'm afraid we can't stay here. One crosses the plain of Pamir as quickly as possible. However, we will be spending a few days at Lop.
Lop? Where's that?
It's a town on the edge of the Gobi Desert, beyond Kashgar and Yarkand.
I see, and you will be taking us along with you, including the TARDIS.
Doctor, I once transported an entire army and its equipment from Cathay to India, all without loss.
Oh, good. Then I can work as we proceed, yes.
No. The Mongol bearers still half believe that you are evil spirits. They also believe that outside your caravan you are harmless. However, should any of you attempt to enter, there would be trouble.
You saved our lives, Mr. Marco. And the least we can do is to respect your wishes. No one will enter the TARDIS until we reach Lop.
So, welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited about this one.
God, well, we are as well. And the first and most exciting part of the whole show is the what's been described as the farce of my quiz that I do at the top of every show.
I'm so sorry, David.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to test my knowledge of 2 decades before I was born. That's going to be good.
Excellent. Right, that's a point for David for showing willing, and I'm afraid, Mark, that's a point off of your total for sounding, if anything, I think slightly disengaged. So the point of the quiz, as you say, is just to kind of establish the context and explore the zeitgeist of when this story we're going to talk about was broadcast. So it's all about sort of events relating to Marco Polo. So question 1, shout out when you have an answer. What was the name of the 60th episode of The Sopranos?
God. I've never watched it, so I wouldn't have a clue.
Was it I'll bury you next to a horse's head?
The answer was Marco Polo.
Oh.
Okay, question.
You're just too funny.
Question 2. When did polo mints first go on sale?
I'm going to say 1952.
I'm going to say 1958.
Oh, well, I think we give that point to David. It was actually 1948, but he was only 4 years out. So that's good. Okay, question 3, sport question. Who are the current holders of the Polo World Championship?
India.
It's...
The Windsors.
Brilliant. The answer is Argentina, who won it in 2017. For a bonus point, David, can you remember where the World Championship was hosted in 2017?
Was it in the UK?
No, Sydney. So that's a point off.
Home turf.
That's lamentable. Okay, question 4. When did the Volkswagen Polo go on sale?
I'm going to say 1975.
I'm going to say 1974.
Oh, you're both eerily and scarily sort of in, right on it. But Mark did get the point. It is 1975.
Woohoo!
But there was probably like an early proof version knocking around in 1974. So I feel like I want to give David a point anyway, just because.
Yeah, I see how this is going.
I like him more than you. Final question.
That's understandable.
Final question. And this is a travel question, after a fashion. What is the average price for a room in the Marco Polo Hotel in Dubai right now? And that's right now, like about an hour ago when I checked.
Oh.
In what currency?
Oh,
yeah.
Can we convert all the answers into pounds or AED? That's Arab Emirate Dirham.
Probably. Let me see. Hotels I've stayed in the Middle East are usually pretty pricey, so I'm going to say £200 even now.
Okay, Mark, any advance?
I am going to go with £201.
201. I see what you've done there. I like your style, like a panther. You've moved in, and you've spent literally £1 more than David has. The answer is £23. It's a dry hotel. It's Islamic, so there's no booze. So it's kind of a rubbish hotel. But it is near the creek. So if you're on foot, it's about a 10-minute walk to the creek. So I'm going to say David won that by 3 points to 2.
Woohoo!
It was a bit of a landslide, really, wasn't it? It wasn't even close.
I mean, yeah. Anyway, that's enough of my nonsense. Let's talk about Marco Polo.
Yes, Dave, I believe this is a favourite of yours.
Absolutely. It really, really is. Any list of top 10 Doctor Who stories I would ever write would have to have Marco Polo in there. That's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. This is genuinely a top 10 classic for me.
Now, I put a question out to our listeners through the Nerdology feed, just saying, can you rate a story that you can't see in the way that it was intended? Can you still get enjoyment out of it? And obviously, for you, that's a definite yes. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that at the very least, you can certainly appreciate the script, which to me is the most important part of any show. You can get a pretty good handle on some of the performances, particularly, I think, at this stage of the show's history. And in the case of Marco Polo, there's also so much visual reference material around that I think you can get you can get a pretty accurate take on exactly what this would have looked like to watch in a way that something like maybe the Mythmakers, for example, you would struggle to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. To me, it feels like this is the first time we really see the TARDIS team, as it were, because in the previous stories they've kind of been thrown together through circumstances, and by the end of Edge of Destruction they kind of feel like they've come together as friends, and this feels like a first kind of proper adventure for them, if you like.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Those first 3 stories are very much about how the band got together, and now we actually get the band doing what they like in what I still think is probably the most lyrical and the most poetic of Doctor Who scripts.
I also think it's probably the first the first sort of relatable historical story, because Tribe of Gum, really, it's so far back in time, it might as well have just been on another planet, whereas
exactly.
With this, at least it's kind of near enough that you can relate to the characters to a degree.
Oh, absolutely. It's the first of that real, boys' book of history type story where you've got a classic historical figure, Marco Polo, and would later have Robespierre and Richard I and Shakespeare and all of those. It's the first of those for sure.
Yeah, Zara and Cal very much weren't in my big book of history that I looked at when I was young. So
no.
So yes. So just to kind of look at where we're coming from. So my thing with this, David, is I've not watched much 60s Doctor Who at all. I'm a child of the 80s. I've explored a bit of the 70s, but really the whole 60s I'm coming to afresh. So today, for the first time, I sat down and watched a recon of Marco Polo. Mark, how many times have you gone through it?
I think this is probably my third time watching it. I have to say, if this is your first recon, you're possibly being a bit spoiled because you have these beautiful, gorgeous colour photos. Was it Boris Hussain that got those commissioned?
Yes.
Yeah. And we've got to be really thankful to him for that, because it really gives you just a beautiful insight into what the show must have looked like. Probably better than you would have done if you'd been watching the show go out on a tiny little 425 lines TV back at the time.
That was like an inch by an inch little screens in the corner of the living room. So yes, I was going to say that I didn't really notice that I was watching a recon, and I just went straight through it in two goes, and I found it carried me along really quite admirably. Whereas some episodes, like you get to episode, I think it's episode 3 of the Web of Fear, and that is slightly hard work because you've got about 6 photographs being dragged out across the 25 minutes. But there are such great images for this story that they've got enough to kind of keep a sense of motion going, and you're able to see what I think genuinely is a very sort of sumptuously dressed story. Brilliant sets, just remarkable, and I would say it's the most enjoyable thing we've watched so far.
Well, that's good.
High praise indeed. So we've got a pretty big cast really for this one, considering last time round it was just the principal cast. So we've got Mark Eden as Marco Polo, who's probably best known to viewers of my age as
Alan Bradley.
Alan Bradley, yeah, the bad guy from Coronation Street. He was a really nasty piece of work, but he's I was going to say he's a hero in this. He's obviously not a perfect hero, because he doesn't take the Doctor and the companions' word every time they try to tell him something. He does seem to be swayed quite a lot by Tegana.
Interesting thing about Alan Bradley, and I may be wrong, was he the guy that was trying to con Rita out of a lot of money or something? And,
yes.
And he died in Blackpool, didn't he?
Yeah, he got run over by
a tram, probably just outside what would have been the Doctor Who experience. Which, if you don't know, David, was a brilliant Doctor Who exhibition in Blackpool in the, I want to say, late 70s and early 80s, and I remember going there when I was about 5, and they've got this sort of big plastic police box thing on the street, and you go through the doors and down some stairs, and you're in a huge underground Doctor Who exhibition. It was amazing. Anyway, that's a complete digression, and you were making a serious point about Tegana.
Yeah, I guess it's to do with the politics, and also the fact that he is desperate to go back home to Venice, and I guess he doesn't want to ruffle anyone's feathers. He just wants to get the TARDIS back to the Kubla Khan and get his way home again.
And in that sense, he is an incredibly sympathetic hero, if you like. And you say that he's not perfect, and he's not, but then no character is. And the fact that even when he's making what we as the audience view as being the wrong decision, we totally understand why.
Yeah, it just gives an extra element of depth to the character, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is he a sort of faintly offside hero, or is he a really nice villain? It's hard to really know where he falls on that spectrum.
He does steal the TARDIS, which is,
He does, so that does technically make him a baddie.
Well, it's not cricket, is it?
Well, I don't.
But I think the cast as a whole, even though it's quite a large cast, I was quite impressed with the characters that we had. So Darren Nesbitt is Tegana, and Xenia Merton. I was watching the photos, and I do know her from somewhere, and I hadn't twigged before the times I'd seen it before. She was in Space 1999, the Jerry Anderson thing back in the 70s. But I think it's a pretty decent cast, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Tegana, Darren Nesbitt as Tegana is fantastic, and he's one of the classic villains, I think, of the Hartnell era. Martin Miller as Kublai Khan. Now, that's a part that, had it been played even slightly wrong, would have been a complete farce. But he pitches it absolutely perfectly, and he can go toe-to-toe with William Hartnell and score a draw.
I mean, there is the elephant in the room, which, this day and age, people are a lot more sensitive about people of different ethnicities crossing that sort of line, whereas I guess in the 60s it was a bit more commonplace. I think possibly it treads the line a bit better than something like Talons of Wen Chiang, because Li Sen Chang, I think he's kind of portrayed as a grotesque, really, isn't he? Whereas I think a lot of the characters in this, apart from maybe a couple, are quite sympathetic.
Oh, I think they're all sympathetic. I mean, even though Tegana is definitely the baddie of the story, I think his motivations within the context of the character
He's got his own agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. And his agenda is understandable. It's relatable, given who he's playing. And I think that he's given a lot of sympathy. And you're right, he's not grotesque in any way. And I think that in terms of that sort of yellow face makeup that people talk about with Talons and with other shows, I mean, the same thing happens with Bernard Kay when he plays Salah ad-Din in The Crusades. Because it's in black and white, I don't think we notice that much, and are maybe a bit more forgiving.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
And I think because it's a recon, we're a lot more forgiving as well, because we don't really see it as such. Do you know what I mean? It's a fairly arbitrary distinction, but I didn't feel like it was going to be a problem. Also, I suppose in the 60s it was that little bit less common to get that many Chinese actors knocking around West London, whereas by the mid-70s there was really no excuse. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Well, let's just have a couple of minutes talking about Darren Nesbitt's Tegana, because it's this kind of suave, saturnine, brooding, but very elegant portrayal, which I think, is kind of in many ways a kind of early forerunner of the Delgado Master. He's just very, very poised and just radiating shiftiness. Every time there's a cliffhanger, you think, oh, here we go. And yeah, I just thought, obviously he stole the show from under everyone.
He does get a couple of really good cliffhangers as well. I think that one to the end of part 2, I think it is, the here's your water Marco Polo, come for it. That's a really wonderful image and was quite a powerful cliffhanger for me. But at the other end of the show, it's part 5 or part 6 where he confronts Iain on that country road with the sword, and he's just very subtle and very underplayed, just the come. It's not over the top, it's not extravagant, it's just really, really, really effective.
And so this, this is probably just my interpretation because it's the first time I'm seeing this, but it feels like this is a very different show to what would become the kind of slightly more arch and camp thing that the show would evolve into, mainly under, I suppose, Pat Troughton, where it was a lot more played on quite cliched performances and quite obvious motivations. But with Tegana in this story, he's not being a lazy actor. He's not playing the villain. He's really giving us a quite nuanced performance, and I think that this is just an amazing treat because of that.
And we are in an era of the show as well where television was still in its infancy in many ways, and so a lot of the both production crew and the cast were coming from British movies and British stage. So they were used to a very sort of Shakespearean, serious type of performance, and they weren't really playing for TV in the way that, give it another 5 years, as you say, by the time you get to the Troughton era, they would play it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so it was all ways round. It was a very sumptuous production. As I said, you've got a great cast, you've got fantastic sets. We've all seen the amazing photos, but also the script, John Lucarotti's script. Now, obviously, because this is the 4th story, this is John Lucarotti's first script for the show. What if anything, do we know about John Lucarotti?
Well, we know that he wrote another 2 stories for Doctor Who, both historicals, the Aztecs and the Massacre, and he novelised a couple of those. I certainly know that he submitted a script for the Tom Baker era that was basically rewritten from scratch and became The Ark in Space. Outside of that, though, I actually don't know a lot about him.
No, neither do I. I'm beginning to wish I'd sort of Googled it 10 minutes ago.
I mean, I don't know how much of it is down to John Lucarotti or David Whittaker, the script editor, but it does feel very authentic. It feels like they've done a lot of their research, and I think the way it works, although it's a 7-part story, which by modern standards is really long, it doesn't feel like it drags. It feels like it's got a really good pace to it, and I think the way I found that I got accustomed to watching recons was to do it in chunks rather than try to do the whole thing in one go, because that can be a bit of a push at times. But I felt this worked so well in keeping you interested and wanting to come back to see what happened in the next episode.
Yeah, I've got to say, I feel like it was the shortest 7-parter I've ever watched.
And it does that thing which really good 7-parters do, which is that it does move the story. And Marco Polo is probably the most epic of the classic Doctor Who stories. And the story itself actually goes for weeks, if not months. And they do move from the plain of Pamir right down to the Gobi Desert, and you get the stuff going through there. You get the bamboo forest. You then arrive in Shantou. You go to Peking. Like, the number of destinations and locations that they cover in here does mean that every couple of episodes you almost are getting a whole new story or a whole new dynamic, and that really does help the interest.
So the original idea for the show was to be a blend of the historical with the science fiction. Here we are at the end of story number 4, and I've got to say, as much as we've enjoyed, the business with the cavemen and then the nasty robots in their little metal town, and then the 2-parter knocking around in the console room, fluffing your lines left, right and centre. I've got to say, this is the most enjoyable story thus far, and I really feel like if the show had come down very heavily on a more historical story kind of focus from here on in, I think it would have been a very different show, but I think it would have been an absolutely amazing thing to watch.
It would have been, and it must have been really interesting being a member of the audience at that stage. And as you say, going from cavemen to Daleks, and then suddenly you're in 1200s China. I just wonder, were people sitting there going, "What is this show?"
What is happening? What is happening? It is wild, isn't it? I know we're kind of used to it now, and when the show came back in 2005, that's very much the format, sort of forwards, backwards, present day, or whatever. But audiences now obviously they've got that kind of race memory of what Doctor Who is and what it does, and it wasn't an issue. But yes, to be watching this in the 60s, and you've now spent as long following them across China as you did with the Daleks, and it must be so disorientating. But at the same time, you've got the show 25 minutes on a Saturday afternoon, and literally anything can happen. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
What I particularly like about this story is that it's a pure historical, so there's no alien involvement, apart from the Doctor, obviously. But it doesn't feel like the plot has been shoehorned in any particular way. It feels like it's quite a natural series of events, if that makes any sense. Which, I don't know how long they could really go on doing that. Once they started to introduce the sort of aliens creeping into the historical stories, I don't know how much longer. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why they stopped doing them, whether they could sustain the interest of the viewer. But, I loved this. I thought it was a fun story.
There's certainly a lot of audience research from the time that suggests that a lot of the audience did prefer the science fiction stories and the futuristic stories to the historicals. I think that's quite well documented. And it's very interesting when you look at that first conception of the show as a very educational sort of show. That is so obvious in this serial, where you get those little sort of bits about, let's talk about how atmospheric pressure affects how hot water boils out, and let's talk about how bamboo burns out, and let's talk about how condensation is made. Hey kids, we're going to learn something right now. Let's just stop the story and chat. It just looks very, very obvious looking back now, because they really didn't keep that up for much longer.
But it was very lovely as well, and I enjoyed it very much. And if I'd been a child at the time, I would have got a lot out of it, as it was.
Absolutely.
When I was a child and I was watching Forward to Doomsday, there was very little in that, really, that you could take away from it.
You didn't learn to speak a bit of Aboriginal out of that one?
I might have tried to do some of the dancing in the playground, but I would definitely have been told off for cultural appropriation.
I think it's incredible what they managed to get on screen. I know they had a little bit of filming at Ealing Studios, but quite a lot of it was filmed at Lime Grove, which is pretty tiny by modern TV studio standards. I think they do a great job of really giving you a believable setting.
Yes, it's hard to, obviously without being able to watch it. We've got the photographs, sure, and they're obviously taken to advantage. I mean, the final, for example, the final confrontation in the court, it looks like a very large sort of chamber, but possibly not. And Lime Grove, as we've discussed, was about 3 foot by 2 foot, and they couldn't fit anything in it. So it was obviously a very strategic production, but the sense I got, certainly from watching it today, was absolutely, it wasn't cramped, it wasn't crammed, it was just so good.
Did you have reservations coming into it then, if you'd not really watched Recons before, as to what you were really going to expect?
Web Part 3 was my kind of Recon background, and I wasn't necessarily...
Yeah, that's not going to inspire anyone, really. No offence to the guys who did that, but...
I wasn't necessarily looking forward to it, because I thought, well, it's a 7-parter. It's a historical, so it won't even have the Daleks. And, while not unenthusiastic, I was expecting fairly hard work to kind of concentrate on this thing. But, oh, my word, it was... And I suppose, as David rightly pointed out, it is the richness of the script, which is the kind of main element of the show we have now, is we have the audio track, and we have what is a really solid script. I mean, if you boil it down, it's essentially it's a kind of a distrust triangle between Marco and the TARDIS crew and Tegana, and they sort of take it in turns to lie and get caught lying and get punished and then get locked up and then escape. But we escaped because he's bad. Oh, well, now we don't trust him, and so on. And there is a limit to how long that can go on for, and when they sort of attempt to do that again in subsequent stories, it does get really quite annoying. But I think they kind of judged it to perfection here.
There's only one moment, I think, in the whole 7 episodes that does feel a little bit forced to keep things going on, and that's the moment where the Doctor has created that second TARDIS key. He is about to escape, and then there's the whole, Susan, I've just got to go off and say goodbye to Ping Cho, and I've got captured. I guess we'll do another 3 episodes, That's the only bit that I thought, okay, that's just a little bit forced. But if that's the worst you can say in a 7-parter, that's pretty good. Yeah,
that's not bad going, is it really? So, David, if this is one of your favourite stories, have you read the Target novelisation, and how does that stand up?
Yeah, look, I've read the Target novelisation when I was 10. I remember it vividly, and I've read it since, and it is a really, really good novelisation. It is definitely one of the longer ones, particularly for the time that it was released. And it does, I think, absolute justice to the story. It takes time to explore these characters, and it's very true, I think, in style to what's on television.
Yeah, that's good, because sometimes they kind of really pare it down too much, and it just feels a bit like he said, she said, but some of the really good ones can embellish it a bit, and really it lets you get a bit of a flavour of what the show would have been like.
Yes, this definitely isn't the War Games in 100 pages, no.
No.
But then I suppose neither is it the Crusade in, what was that, about 800 pages? Or so it felt like when I was but young. Have you read it, Mark?
I must admit I haven't. Maybe it was my young mind. I tended to go more for the monster books. If I saw an alien on the front, that would perhaps draw my attention more than some of the historical ones, I have to say.
Interesting. I read it, I think once. The Target books kind of fell into 2 camps. There were the ones that you read over and over and over and over again until the cover dropped off. And then there were ones that you read once and thought, yes, I'll pop that on the shelf then. And there it stayed for about 20 years. David, were you a big Target man?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was young, Doctor Who was one of those things that my father and I had in common. So when I was very young, my bedtime story would usually be a chapter of a Target novel.
Oh, wow.
And then as I was starting to get, older, sort of 8, 9, 10, I would just start to read them myself. And that's really how I learned to read. They were, for me, what Harry Potter was for children in the late 90s. So I grew up on Target novels, and as my dad would come home from work every so often with a new Target novel, and it was incredibly exciting. So I was very lucky in that way.
I can't imagine how wonderful that must have been. My dad, who, to be fair, did watch Doctor Who when it began until about, I think, until the end of John Pertwee. But by the time I came along and became an obsessive little fanboy, he was sick to death of it, and he didn't want anything to do with it. So he did buy me my first Target book, but that was pretty much where it ended. But those must be some fantastic memories that you have of some really wonderful time.
Yeah, look, very, very much so. And as a quick aside, my dad was very lucky in that he watched Doctor Who go out in the UK as a young boy, and he saw all of season 5, then caught the boat over to Australia and got to see all of season 5 again, because it sort of followed him out here.
So you're not jealous at all?
No, but no, he can remember stuff like Tomb and Web of Fear, going out because he saw it twice.
Lucky thing. Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, my son is 6, so still just a little bit too young for the Target books, I'm afraid. And I've got I have a whole range of crossover books of the Mr. Men and Doctor Who. I don't know if you've seen those doing the rounds.
Oh yeah,
I've seen them online. I haven't actually seen one.
Yeah, he
in real
loves
life.
those.
Yeah.
He really loves the second Doctor. So I think that's hopefully bodes well for the future. But I don't want to rush him too quickly because it might be a bit scary.
I think now you want to go straight into reading him Transit by Ben Aronovich.
Oh yeah, that'd be fine. Yeah.
No one deserves to have to read Transit by Ben Aronovich.
Or maybe RTD's novel. It's good bedtime reading for children.
Damaged Goods.
Yeah.
No. I was actually going to reread that in the next couple of weeks, so I'll let you know
how
all
right,
I get
then,
on with it.
Let me know if it's kid friendly.
I've got a hunch it won't be.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've totally blundered off the beaten track into the thicket of nonsense. Let's try and bring our focus back to the story. What's everyone's, I suppose, fairly crass question, but what's everyone's favourite bit of Marco Polo?
I'll let David go first because he's the guest.
For me, it's all the stuff crossing the Gobi Desert. I'm not quite sure why, but that really stands out in the memory. I think it's just there's a real intensity to it and a real seriousness of it. And, Doctor Who's kind of at its best when you really feel threatened. I guess, we'll use the cliche when you're behind the sofa. And although the Gobi Desert isn't full of Daleks and Cybermen or anything like that, the notion that death is just around the corner and that our heroes are in real danger is so strong in that desert, and it looks amazing the way they use the backdrops and just with very little bits of set, but wonderfully created backdrops, and then the way that they do the soundscape in the sandstorm is phenomenal. The way that Tegana gets that cliffhanger, I mean, basically a guy just sitting there pouring water out over the sand. That's not a lot, but it felt like such an amazing, oh my god, how do they get out of this one cliffhanger? And so that to me, I think, is the really strong part of the story. Plus, I think, as you mentioned earlier, this is where we first get to see the TARDIS crew actually functioning as a crew, as a team, having an adventure. And you do get that sense in here of these 4 characters really working together. I just think it's quite lovely.
I think there's some really nice character moments in this. I adore the bits with the Doctor and the Kubla Khan when they're playing backgammon. I just think that's just really beautifully played out. And also, it's nice with Susan as well. She has that little friendship going with Ping Cho. And I think those are the moments that sort of stay in my memory from this story. It's just, it's a really good character piece, I think. And
can I add there as well, as somebody who's an unabashed Hartnell fan, when you listen to or watch on the recons those scenes with the Doctor and Kublai Khan, this idea that William Hartnell was some sort of blundering actor who could barely get through a line. Look, he had his off days like they all did, but he is phenomenally good in those scenes. Really, really strong.
Yeah, no, he's...
Well, I've got to say, I didn't notice a single Billy Fluff in the whole story.
No, that's probably fair.
Well, so my favourite bit, I guess, was I suppose there was a very and again, this is an impression I got from watching a recon, so it may not have been there in the sort of broadcast version as it was performed, but there was just a wonderful moment just before you cut to Tegana by the well, pouring the water out and going, "Ah, ha, you will die of thirst," where Ian Chesterton, and I don't want this to sound cruel, but he actually managed to convey a profound sense of thirst, and for me that was the first time he's really gone from being kind of a presenter on a children's TV show to actually giving some acting. So that really kind of hit home. And then just the bit with Hartnell where he won't kowtow because he literally can't bend over. And the two men sort of go off and they're grunting and groaning and they've got aches and pains, and that whole final episode where he finally, you know, the most unlikely thing, if you go back to the start of Unearthly Child, the most unlikely way a story can ever be resolved is by the Doctor just striking up a friendship with, you know, the head honcho and just kind of getting out of it in that capacity. I thought it was absolutely staggering and fairly audacious, but at the same time it was done with such charm.
I also thought it was a nice, I don't know if it's a directorial thing or from the script or a bit of both, but I really liked the way that they had the map. Admittedly, obviously we're seeing this as a recon, so I don't know how this would have played out in the actual broadcast version, but I just love
it took me so long to realise that it wasn't the original map and it was a recon.
Well, that's a good sign, because that means you've been drawn into the story. You're not even thinking about it being a recon anymore, which is great.
Absolutely.
And I think, because I think I'd read that they were going to have each of the characters do the voiceover as they went to the various way stations, but I think they really made a good choice just to bring it back to Marco Polo, because it's, in many ways, it's his story, isn't it? His desperate need to get back to Venice and the travails of him going on this massive journey to get back to the Kublai Khan.
Is it worth mentioning Susan in this? Because I know Susan gets a lot of grief from fans these days.
Yeah.
The character more so than Carol Ann Ford, I guess. But I think she's really strong in this one. And it's worth mentioning that Susan actually gets her own heroine moments in this, particularly when it's her and Ping Cho that work out what's going on with Tegana first. It's them that work out what's going on in the Cave of 500 Eyes. I think Susan's given us some real proper credibility in this that maybe isn't going to last.
I think that's why it's such a shame that this one is missing, because from my memory of growing up as a kid, getting to see the occasional repeat, we didn't have too many over here like you guys had every 5 minutes in Australia, you lucky things. The overriding memory for me of Susan was sort of tripping over and twisting her ankle all the time, and this
and
really
screaming a lot.
Yeah, no, this really does give her that opportunity to have those lovely character moments, like I said before, with Ping Cho, and as you mentioned, you know, it drives the plot because they're on to Tegana before anyone else, I think, really.
Yeah, I think this is probably the story that Carol Ann Ford would have wanted to have on her show reel had it been available. Then again, I think it's it's a Barbara Light story for me. I didn't really feel like she got involved as much as she has in recent stories. You think how integral she was to the Edge of Destruction, and you know. So, but that's nice. You know, sometimes it's a very good thing to, you know, foreground some characters at the expense of others, and you can give William Hartnell a week off by having him pass out and give someone else the heavy lifting. So I think that's fair enough, and we've already established that Barbara and Jacqueline Hill is magnificent.
Oh, she's wonderful.
by all means, yeah, let's make this one a better Susan story. Is there anything else to say on this one before I because I want to pick David's brains?
Oh,
the one point that you've mentioned in passing, but I think I just wanted to really emphasise is how well the production values here work, but how they could probably only work in these early 60s stories, in that what they do is, as I mentioned before, they have very nice sets, but particularly when they're outside, they have very basic sets, a bit of stuff on the floor. It's almost like they're setting up for a Star Wars green screen movie, and then they have these wonderful drapes, these wonderful back drapes, and that just looks epic. Now, you can do that if you're watching on 425 line on a 1960s black and white TV. As we've seen with something like the Aztecs, the moment you watch it on a vid-fied Blu-ray, you go, okay, that's just a drape. But it works so well here, and it wouldn't have looked like that when it was broadcast. And so they kind of have this perfect confluence of a lot of effort on Waris Hussein's part and the designer's part, but also a viewing experience that allows you to get away with simplicity, looking really, really good. That if you did this in a Pertwee story, it would just look absolutely naff.
Yeah, you're right. They certainly do a good job of really bringing you into the story, and it doesn't feel... I mean, I'm okay with... I've watched quite a lot of 62, and it can feel quite theatrical and quite stagey at times. Now, admittedly, this is a recon, so we're not going to see it as it was intended, but it doesn't really feel particularly like that watching it back.
No, not at all.
So, let me just cut in with a question, David. What would have been the kind of current story that would have been your first memory of watching? Are you a Tom Baker man, or a Peter Davison man, or a...
Well, you see, that's a very hard question for me to ask because of the repeats we had. So the first story that I can remember going out on first broadcast is Mordred Undead, but the next week I would have watched Spearhead from Space, and then a year later I would have watched season 12, and I was watching Colin Baker and then going back to watch the Pertwee era on television because all of these eras were being repeated on a regular basis. I mean, a year later we got a couple of Troughtons repeated. So within sort of the first few years of my Doctor Who watching experience as a 4, 5, 6-year-old, I had watched Doctors 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 all on TV, literally all of them on TV. So I didn't really get that experience.
I mean, that's unfathomable and unthinkable, and I'm so jealous.
Yeah, me too.
But I suppose from that then it kind of places you as, because my first memory I think was Full Circle, and I went on to become a bit of an 80s Doctor Who obsessive and didn't really give much of a fig in about anything that had happened previously, but you obviously had more of a grounding in the show from the word go, and now you've got this reputation, certainly with Mark at least, that you're something of a Hartnell fanboy. Why the Hartnell era?
It's an era that I've come to appreciate more and more as I've grown up. I kind of think it was a bit like the Beatles, when you're a teenager you love John Lennon, and then you get into your 20s and you think Paul McCartney's stuff's awesome, and then suddenly you mature and you realise how awesome George Harrison is. And for me it's very much like that with the Hartnell era. As a kid I loved the Pertwee era and the Tommy era, and I still do. They're still wonderful, but as I really became more focused on script and writing and character than just adventure, so to say, I really found how much I loved the Hartnell era and how innovative it was and how special and different it was, and how amazing Hartnell is as the Doctor. And particularly, Doctor Who has inspired a lot of fans a love of something. Sometimes it's a love of science, a love of writing. For me, Doctor Who, more than anything, inspired a love of history. Mm-hmm. And I did a history degree at university, and so stories like Marco Polo and the Aztecs and the Crusades and the Highlanders are particularly special for me because they really linked in with me at some really deep level. And I could watch those stories again and again and again. The last time I listened to Marco Polo, I had it on in the car as the MP3 file, and I listened to it, and I could have very happily gone back to part 1 and listened to it all again straight away. I loved it that much. So it just sits so well for me because it is so poetically written.
Would it be overstressing it to say that it's kind of helped to shape you into the person you are today?
It's definitely shaped my interests and my how could I put it? Insofar as, you know, a love of literature and history and all the rest of it shapes my interests and who I am. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's rate it then. Let's rate this story.
Dave, I've got a feeling I know where this is going to go, but give us your marks out of 10, please.
That's easy. This is a 10 for me. Unquestionably a 10.
I'm going to give this a 9.
I'm going to give myself a bit of wiggle room. I'm going to go for a 9 as well. It's, as Iain said, it is a real highlight so far of what we've seen on this grand journey we've embarked on. But there's still a lot to come yet, so I want to keep my powder a little bit dry just in case something comes along that really wows me that I didn't expect to. So, but I think 9 is a pretty solid score.
So, feedback.
I've got mail.
So, we have heard from the Sirens of Audio, which is a great podcast from down in Tasmania, down your part of the world there, Dave, Dwayne Bunny. So I put out a tweet just saying, can you rate something that is not available in its original form? So he's replied with, it's a joy to listen to. I also love this recon as there's a colour version. But like Talons, am I supposed to boycott this due to the English actors playing Mongols and Chinese? I can't do that, I'm afraid. Next up, we have got 42 to Doomsday, another Australian Doctor Who podcast. I'm not sure if this will be Mark or Rob. Probably Mark, I think. Seems to come across him mainly as 42 to Doomsday.
It's usually Mark unless it's really shouty, then it's Rob.
He just says, it's being held captive somewhere in Wigan. So thanks for that.
I really hope it is. I genuinely hope that all the rumours about this existing somewhere are
I just
true.
wish he pulled his finger out. I mean, how long does he need? He needs to get off of Twitter and harassing people and get on with delivering our damn Doctor Who. And lastly from me, I've got Rich Tipple, who, if you may or may not know, he is one of the guys who was responsible for the colorization of Day of Armageddon, the episode from Dalek's Master Plan that got colorized, and they did some fantastic work there. Hopefully, unfortunately, because of the whole COVID thing, the chances of people getting to see that at the moment are pretty much zero, but hopefully once things start to get back to normal again, I'd like to think there's a good chance that everyone will get a chance to have a look at that, because it does sound amazing. I've seen the trailer, it looks really cool. So Rich says, I think we know so much about this production that we can rate it with some certainty. It's undeniably a classic. 5 out of 5 from me.
Okay, so we've heard also from Tim at Doctor Who Podcasters, who says of Marco Polo, superb. The early vision of the show crystallised perfectly in 7 episodes. That's the kind of wholehearted agreement we want. Richard off of Something Who has tweeted in. Oh, let's go with tweeted in. I think we can get a very good idea, he says, of something like The Crusade, which is half missing. Marco Polo is harder work to consume, but can still yield to audio or reconstructions, but probably not in a one-er. Now, I personally disagree with that. I think this is the 7-parter that I could quite happily sit down and watch again, or experience in one sitting. Anyway, then we have a message from someone who calls himself Dr. Sinister, who writes in, I toasted my marshmallows with episode 2. There was a vinegary aftertaste with notes of despair. 4 out of 10.
That'll be Rob from 42 to Doomsday.
Yes. I sort of feel unclean and faintly terrified now. But finally from me, Lewis Butters wrote in just to sum this story up as beautiful historical fiction.
Yes, so in response to your original tweet asking can you assess a missing story, Rob Irwin, who is from a little podcast called The Doctor Who Show.
I believe it's very good.
Yeah, I've heard good things. He says, you certainly can rate missing episodes via their script, their audio, their recon, or their novel, or a combination of those things. It's not the same as watching the real deal, but when you've seen a ton of stories with the same cast, you can sort of imagine them quite well, so hearing their voices and reading the story gets you about, 80% of the way there? To a fairly large degree, I suggest. As for Marco Polo, it's quite marvellous. 9 out of 10. I think he was channeling Russell T Davies at that point.
Thank you, Rob.
And I then put out a tweet of my own at Mark's request, and I just made the comment that Marco Polo is a top 10 story for me. What do you think? And I've got a couple of quick comments here. So Stephen B. from the New to Who podcast says, it's a sprawling epic that plays out beautifully in the imagination, supported by a very lush imagery from the production, not all actually of which are from the story itself. I'm also biased towards liking it, because I conflate it with one of my favourite ever books, Invisible Cities, by Italo Calvino, with it both having Marco Polo as a central character. Its pace lends itself to its epic sprawl, which is so unlike much of Who, but I wonder whether we'll all truly love it only after it has been returned. I don't want to countenance if instead of when. Ham-fisted Bap Vendor says, I'll confess I've only experienced this via the cut-down recon on the beginning DVD and via the existing telesnaps. About time I took the plunge and listened to the surviving audio. With Hussein directing, I could easily imagine this as having been exemplary example of Doctor Who. Darren Signal replies, it was shown here in October-November 1966, so I may have seen it when I was a 1-year-old. Don't recall it, so obviously it wasn't that memorable. And thanks for that, Darren. Yeah. And Al Reviews Who on Twitter says, it's in my top 3 Hartnell stories. Superb story.
Excellent. Thank you so much to everyone for your feedback. We really appreciate it. And if you want to get in touch, we'll be listing all the various ways over our end credits. So stay tuned if you want to get in touch with us on a forthcoming episode.
Okay, I think it just remains for us to humbly thank our wonderful guest, Mr. Kitchen, for joining us this week. Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'll turn up and talk about Hartnell any day, any time.
That's good, because
excellent.
We might struggle with some of the other stories, so that's good to know.
Would you like to give your show a plug while you're here? Or your many shows, actually. You've got 3 on the go?
Yeah. So I'll be very quick. Look, you can find all of these just by looking on social media or on Apple Podcasts. But I co-host the Doctor Who show with Rob Irwin, where we do a monthly show plus various specials now and then. If you're a fan of Blake 7, my friend Richard and I co-host Spacefall, a Blake 7 podcast, where we go through each episode. We're just about at the end of season 2 of Blake 7 now, so good time to jump on. And previously, along with a couple of others, Tom, Rob, Richard and I did the Goodies Pirate podcast, where we successfully watched and discussed all the episodes of the Goodies. So, yeah, find any of those if you're interested, and we'd love to have you as a listener.
Excellent. Thank you, David. So thanks very much for joining us. We will be back next time for a trip to Marinus. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email us at mailbagofrassilon@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @TimeEndSpacePod, and you can also find us on Facebook. If you want to leave some audio feedback, there is a link in the show notes. You can use your phone or your computer and leave up to 60 seconds of feedback. Or if you're listening via the Anchor website, you can click on the message button and leave your audio. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you to Momo Tempo for providing our theme music.